The United States of America has been experiencing unprecedented levels of growth within worker movements or worker-oriented politics. Now, much of this has been cooking for a while if you remember the Occupy Wall Street movement, as well as the many political and economic sentiments that followed the infamous 2008 financial crisis. Of course, a lot of this actually goes much further than that. If you go back to the civil rights movement, you will find leaders like Martin Luther King talking about the plight of the poor and working class.
I feel that we are in the midst of a most critical period in our nation, and the economic problem is probably the most serious problem confronting the Negro community. And I might say the most serious problem confronting poor people generally. And I don't want to be narrow about this, talking only about the black poor in our country, because I must be concerned about Puerto Ricans who are poor, Mexican Americans, American Indians, and Appalachian whites. And we are confronting a major depression in the poor community. And I think the time has come to bring to bear the power of the direct action, the nonviolent direct action movement on the basic economic conditions that we face all over the country.
In fact, you can go back almost the entire length of America's history and you can find similar sentiments and struggles igniting all throughout. In terms of recent history, however, the 2008 financial crisis was the tipping point for many. Although it wasn't really until the pandemic that all of this truly gained some historic momentum. This was due to quite a number of things, many things, in fact, that happened during the pandemic, which exposed certain systemic failures that left certain classes of society especially vulnerable to the ravages of this difficult time. But also, this period has exposed some outright lies that a lot of United States workers have been told for a long time. Ideas like, if you simply work hard enough, you too can achieve the American dream. The American dream being a home, white picket fence, the ability to afford a pet, let alone 2 kids, etc. Ideas like that just seem to melt away in the tears of those who worked to evict people out of their homes, while they themselves were crying because it might be them getting evicted the following week.
At this apartment, the tenant is an elderly woman who can no longer afford the rent. The landlord's mover, Francisco Munoz, works, though he doesn't want to.
I have a family, I have a sister, I have my mom, and we never know. Maybe today is her, tomorrow's me,
People were pushed to the brink, doing essential services, which put them at greater risk of exposure to the virus, while others who worked office jobs, where they were asking to work from home for a long time for various reasons ranging from convenience to lower carbon emissions, but were told that working from home would be impossible, these same people were then asked suddenly to work from home. So what else was a lie? Was a 4-day work week actually feasible all along? Could the idea that more work equals more productivity not be exactly accurate? Many people had time to think during the lockdowns, assess things about the direction of their lives. Some came to the conclusion that the best course of action for their country is that everyone that can stay home must be encouraged to do so. Not just in terms of the government having boots on the ground, but also in terms of things like stimulus checks, in order to incentivize people, but also to make it possible for them to stay home instead of going to work and risking their lives to pay rent. Activity which at the time was especially risky because medical resources had not yet been adequately prepared. And so it was important to flatten the curve so as not to overrun the scant supply of medical services. Others, of course, condemned this plan entirely, claiming that the economy should open up and people should go back to work. Otherwise, they're being paid to stay at home. Eventually, the stimulus checks came. Rent was forgiven for a certain period of time. Impossible things were just happening. People got disillusioned. They started to think about the value of their work, started to think about a work-life balance, started to think about work in general differently. They even started thinking about working conditions. And all of this concern over work contributed to the mass phenomena that is now known as the Great Resignation. US workers ditching their jobs in record numbers, and one of the main reasons for them quitting their jobs is to look for better working conditions, which in some instances was even more of a motivator than better pay, which itself was one of the biggest motivators for why people were reassessing their work arrangements. And right in the middle of this, a subreddit began to emerge. One that exploded to popularity due to the momentum of a movement that was meant to beat the rich at their own game, in part by raising consciousness among ordinary people, so that they can start to think about their place in the economy based on the position they currently occupy, not the one they wish they would occupy, and thus act out economically based on their immediate interests. That subreddit was named WallStreetBets. In WallStreetBets, ordinary individuals went up against hedge funds by going after their short positions in the video game retail company GameStop. They of course went for other companies that had been shorted as well, one of the biggest other examples being AMC. Anyway, in the aftermath, the hedge funds lost a collective $5 billion. So you can just imagine the pressure that followed. And as the famous saying goes, pressure makes the unintentional irony. Pretty soon you had calls for regulation, which were coming from people that are normally for deregulation. The trading app Robinhood, which is named after the English folk character who famously steals from the rich to give to the poor, suddenly decided to freeze trades, in a move that many Redditors, and rightly so, considered to be antithetical to the mission suggested by their deliberate name. Now, the subreddit is still huge. Around that time, they were about 2 million strong. Now, there's 11 million members, as of writing anyway. Although, some of the original members from the GameStop days just don't think that the subreddit is what it used to be. And the prospects of another GameStop seem, well, impossible at this point. Meanwhile, there has been some recent controversy over Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi opposing a bill to ban members of Congress from owning stocks. The logic behind the suggestion to ban them is that members of Congress, being workers of the government, means that they are privy to information to which the ordinary private citizen does not have access, thus giving them an unfair advantage over your normal would-be trader, in a manner which functionally amounts to insider trading. And you know, this isn't a conspiracy theory. We actually saw this happen when, just before the coronavirus caused a downturn, certain stocks that were owned by certain senators were dumped, in suspiciously close proximity to these same senators being briefed about a possible pandemic that was about to hit the world. So, trading regulations for thee, but not for me. Of course, she has subsequently said that she's open to the idea if it has support from her caucus. But she herself, personally, she just doesn't buy into it. You know, it's just so funny to me, because this is the same lady who thought that a good idea to be relatable to people's struggles during lockdown and pandemic blues was for her to show off her fridge full of $12 a pint ice cream. What? In any event, after such things, it seemed like the empire had successfully struck back. Or had it? In the same era of WallStreetBets and Reddit movements, another subreddit was on the rise. Sitting at the very crest of the alleged Great Resignation wave, it became one of the fastest growing subreddits of all time, amassing a huge amount of members in a very short period. The subreddit had been around since 2014, but it really took off around 2020, such that at the beginning of the pandemic, it had 100,000 or so members. But as of January 2021, it has 1.7 million members. Numerous articles and thought pieces have been written about it, video essays, etc. At its height, it was Reddit's most popular news sensation. That subreddit was called AntiWork. And it too wasn't merely confined to the internet, but was actually having real-world impact. And the best example of this was the war on Kellogg's. You see, when the workers at Kellogg's went on strike, AntiWork supported the move. Then, Kellogg's sought to hire scab workers to replace the strikers, a play that infuriated the subreddit. Before you knew it, Kellogg's was overwhelmed with a spam campaign that inundated their hiring site with countless fake applications. And all of that was started by a university student named Sean Wiggs, who was a self-taught coder turned hacktivist, if I may be permitted to use that term. But hey, things were looking up, and they were the example for labor organization in the social media age. And then, the Fire Nation attacked. Fox News contacted the subreddit and asked to speak to one of the moderators. They asked for this moderator specifically, and then this moderator discussed it with her fellow mods about whether to accept it or not, and allegedly they all agreed that she should accept the Fox News interview. Supposedly because she had done some interviews before, which, yeah, she had. One of them was done with Times Live, for instance. Then apparently they proposed this to the wider subreddit. And the general consensus from the subreddit members was that she should not do the Fox News interview. Evidently, one of these detractors to this proposal was a former journalist who obviously advised against the interview, but also offered to prep this moderator should they choose to go through with the interview anyway. So the moderator, against the wishes of the sub, went through with it, relying mostly on the experience of the other 3 or 4 interviews that they had done before, and supposedly foregoing any preparation with the former journalist. And this moderator, well, she seemed to be the best thing Fox News could have ever hoped for. I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want to add language to the personal slights that she received, but basically, if Fox News had scripted this themselves, this interview is exactly what they would have asked for. So, you know, they were suspiciously lucky on that count. All of which means that the interview went about as well as I'm sure you can imagine.
Over 1.6 million subscribers. Joining me now is the person who operates this anti-work group, Doreen Ford. All right, so Doreen, why do you like the idea of being home, not working, but still getting paid by corporate America?
Yeah, so there's some misconceptions about the movement. So we're a movement where we want to reduce the amount of work that people feel like they're forced to do. And so we want to still put in effort, we want to put in labor, but we don't want to necessarily be in a position where we feel trapped. You know, you just quoted from Office Space where that person feels very trapped in their job. I think we're calling for a society where there's less of that. But yeah, absolutely, people still want to do things. They just want to do things where they feel rewarded and they feel like they're in a good spot in their life, and that their job respects them and stuff like that. You know, there's varying.
So Doreen, but you're not being forced to work. This isn't slave labor. You've applied for a job. You've agreed to the terms and conditions of the employment. And, you know, you can walk away from that job at any time and quit. So I don't understand really what this is about, except it sounds like maybe people are just being lazy. Are you encouraging people to be lazy?
So I think laziness is a virtue in a society where people constantly want you to be productive 24/7, and it's good to have rest. That doesn't mean you should be resting all the time or not putting effort into things that you care about. But I think one of the
what do you think is like a good work day? How many hours is you know, a solid work day in your ideal society?
Sure. I mean, I think as much as people want. I mean, I personally work. I have like a 20-25 hour work weeks, which I think is fairly good. So I would like less work hours.
And what do you do, Doreen?
I'm a dog walker.
A dog walker. Okay.
Yes.
And how?
Yeah. So
how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure, I'm 30.
You're 30. Okay. And is there something you want to do besides being a dog walker? Do you aspire to do anything more than dog walking, or is that kind of your pinnacle?
I love working with dogs. If I had to do this for the rest of my life, I wouldn't be super complaining. Dogs are wonderful animals. But I would love to teach. I would love to, work with people and stuff like that.
What would you teach, Doreen?
Philosophy mostly. Just introduction to philosophy, critical thinking, reason, stuff like that.
Okay. Well, I would love to take your class, Doreen. I would just be taking notes the whole time, and you know what? A professor's a very similar schedule than something that you're imagining. So I think that actually might work perfectly for you. Listen, I think this might not be the greatest idea, but who am I to judge? To each their own, they say. It's a free country.
Sure.
Not everything's free, but it is a free country. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We got to run. We got to pay the bills.
We gotta pay the bills.
Afterwards, the subreddit was flooded with attacks, external and internal. Unable to distinguish which was which, the mods went on a banning spree, putting that hammer down on the backs of necks all over the place. The moderator in question became very defensive. She admitted that her performance wasn't all that good, but placed a lot of that blame on Fox News being bad faith actors. To which many people pointed out,
well, what if we just cut off the unemployment? I mean, hunger is a pretty powerful thing. I don't mean physical hunger, because people who truly are in need help. I'm talking about people who can work but refuse to work. But the government is literally putting anvils in many ways on people's shoulders, either through the mandates, regulations, and now through free money, which obviously the piper eventually has to be paid. John, I want to ask you though about this idea of work-life balance, because look, no one wants to miss their kids growing up. No one wants to. You stay in the office your whole life. You never see your family. So that's really important. However, have we taken that a step too far when you think of, well, a lot of the millennials talking about, I need time for self-care. I don't know why I'm harping on that tonight, but the whole self-care movement is a little. I mean, my mother is not with us anymore, but she worked from the time she was 12 during the Depression. If she heard the self-care thing, I think her head would explode.
I think that's right. I have a friend in the military who trains military dogs, Laura, and they only feed a military dog at night because a hungry dog is an obedient dog. Well, if we're not causing people to be hungry to work, then we're providing them with all the meals they need sitting at home.
It's Fox News, What do you expect? But it only got worse with people highlighting the fact that she was unemployed for a long time and was only walking dogs for about 5 hours a week or something.
I have like a 20-25 hour work weeks, which I think is fairly good.
Which made all the factory workers in the sub that pull 8-hour shifts at a time feel very unrepresented. Even though her lifestyle is actually perfectly in line with the original concept of the sub, whose complete name is AntiWork, unemployment for all, not just the rich, or something like that. But also, to be fair to many of the members, in 2020 it did morph into something else other than what it was back in 2014. Then it kept getting worse as people became transphobic and ableist towards her, and then all of that only escalated when allegations were made that she had supposedly admitted elsewhere on the internet to having been a sexual predator. Yeah, despite that, though, the thing that most infuriated people was how the invitation by Fox News to do the interview was initially shared with the sub, and then the sub rejected it. But the mods went ahead with it anyway, proving that old adage, pressure makes unintentional irony. Because the mods behaved anti-democratically. Just like all the bosses that everybody had been complaining about on that same sub for about 2 years now, to explosive levels of relatability and a shared catharsis. Eventually, the subreddit went private. Upon going public again, there were still many people fighting about the direction that the subreddit should take. Some people were saying that the subreddit needs to be deleted altogether, while others were saying that only the mods need to be replaced, etc., etc. The only thing that people seemed to be in agreement about was that no sole unelected person is the representative or leader of a subreddit with 1.7 million members around the world, no matter what power was given to them by the artificial structures of social media platforms. And that all they wanted, unless otherwise stated, was for the moderators to enforce the rules of the sub. And that's it. During the time that AntiWork was private, another subreddit, Worker Reform, grew by 350,000 members. And counting, all in the span of about 24 hours. Many people who believed that the name AntiWork had been tainted forever, or the people who just wanted to reform work in a moderate sense, not abolish it, etc., all of those people flocked to the subreddit aptly named Work Reform. The schisms in ideology and direction are still present in the movement. The subreddit Lost Generation, which was listed as a friend to AntiWork, doesn't think that Fox News should be allowed to matter so much in these circles. Workers Strike Back was always sort of suspicious of the more liberal elements of AntiWork, and is definitely suspicious of Work Reform, in part for seeming to be the new kids on the block and yet trying to be the leaders of workers' movements on Reddit. They also didn't like how Work Reform tried to make a moral equivalency between black power and white power in a post that was frozen the last time I checked. Not only that, but there are accusations going around about how Work Reform has supposedly been taken over by power mods, and that these power mods are fascists in the literal sense, and that these power mods are also taking over AntiWork as well.
There's a lot going on here.
All of this is still developing, and who knows what will emerge. Maybe there's no such thing as bad press in the modern age of politics on the intertubes, where people congregate around dumpster fires for spiritual experiences. AntiWork is back, and it has already regained the number of members it lost during that whole Fox News interview episode. I think there are like 30,000 or so people that are active on it at any given time. So I think it will really be up to them to decide whether the empire has successfully struck back. And with one blow, nochal. An article by The Economist suggests that the Great Resignation might not even necessarily be as advertised. That it might not be materializing as assumed on the ground, and therefore might be overhyped, or at the very least misconceived. There's another article, this one by The Atlantic, which says that it may be better to think of it as the big switch, not the big quit. Because people might not be so much quitting their jobs as just going to better paying ones. Less anti-work, more work reform, maybe? Or something along those lines, because one big motivator has been a better work environment. As usual, I'll leave the links in the description. To that point, a little while before all of this recent debacle, ThedaCare, the daycare, a hospital in Appleton, Wisconsin, filed a lawsuit against their nurses to stop them from quitting their jobs so that they would not go to another company with more competitive pay. And then a judge temporarily blocked those nurses. But yeah, eventually it was lifted, allowing those nurses to leave. But like, think about that, man. That's wild, right? So as important as online movements are, because so many things are being digitized, and also because Sean Wiggs was able to launch that attack from a digital platform, that's all great. But also, touch grass, people. Yeah, it's a thought. It's undeniable that worker-based or worker-concerned movements are making a comeback in the United States. Whether it was Trump Train claiming to fight for the working class and to bring back jobs, or AOC going from being a waitress to one of the most notable people in Washington. Yeah, okay, that's actually not a lot of That's actually not a lot of examples, but it's a lot by American standards, believe you me. Even if superficially, there are still a lot of conversations happening around the space of workers. There is an inescapable buzz around these issues. Will it continue? Well, whatever eventuates, for now, they will have to figure it out for themselves.